elements. And so, for example, my uncle sent me a short video from a wake in Brooklyn, and the people there, that, you know, they'd made their own string band, and they were singing some of those songs, that serenading type of songs. They had their own guitars, but had used car parts, you know, for percussion. So they're keeping the element alive, but they may only come back to Grenada, say for All Saints, for example. You get a lot who will come in to light candles for 2 weeks. So they bring the element with them, but then when they go back to New York, it changes slightly. So would that be a category for itself, or could that be a category for itself, or does their contribution come under the set categories for Grenada?
So the inventory is supposed to be of elements located inside your territory, but there is nothing to stop you from providing in your national inventory a description of that variation that you find in New York. The trick, however, will be documenting it, no, and describing it. Right? So there's nothing to stop you from including it, but you'd want to be able to properly document it. But as a principle, you want it to be elements inside of your territory. But this, what you're describing, as an element that has left the territory and is in some other country, right? But there's nothing to stop you, but the limitation might be how do you document and describe it and so on. Right? Okay. You might want to just put a reference in terms of the description that, is it string band music? Is that what it is? How would you describe it?
Yeah, I would say it's string band, yes. Yeah.
Right. So you'd say that it's also performed by Grenadans in the diaspora using A, B, C, and D, you know, that sort of thing. Okay. Which reminds me, let me show you something since you said that. One of the challenges you will have is this issue of describing an element. Let me see. Let me know if you can see a unit 43 on the screen.
Yep.
All right. So we'll send this out tonight too, but this is to give you a head start in terms of the actual technical side of it, no? So this is one of the things you notice the questionnaire asks you to write a summary of the element. And so you have here by UNESCO providing a sort of 8-point guide as to what should be included in the summary. So what practices, skills, or other features characterize the element concerned? Are any instruments or other objects or specific spaces required for the enactment of the element? What domains of ICH are involved? Which communities or groups practice or perform the element? And identify with it. Where is this practice located? When does it take place? Do some people have particular roles or responsibilities in enacting or transmitting the element? What social and cultural functions does the element perform for the community concerned? This is critical to capture, by the way. What is the social and cultural function of the element? What is the significance to the communities or groups concerned? So like a response to this would be like Karikou boat building is important because it forms a part of the identity of the people of Karikou. That's a sort of thing that you would see appear there. It is a part of a tradition that has been passed down from generation to generation about builders and so on. No? How is the element transmitted? That's that. And then is the practice of or transmission of the element threatened in any way? Right. So that all of those things would go into your description of the element. But you will have this at your disposal as well. I'll share this with you. Adriana will share it with you at the end of the day. Okay. But just to give you an idea of what goes into writing a description of an element. Right, so we go back to our second unit for the day, and that is involving the communities concerned. So in this presentation, we'll look at a brief case study here, and we'll answer the question, why community participation? What does the convention say and the operational directives say about community participation? When is community participation needed? How to achieve community participation and consent. So what does the convention say and the operational directives say? Just as a reminder, ladies and gentlemen, the operational directives are inside that document called the text of the convention, which you have in your possession. No? Normally, what I like to do, I know because not everyone has access to computers, but the text there is a bit long. But if you have access to it on your laptops, you can reference it or so on. But here it's referenced in the PowerPoint and you can go visit it later on. No? So you should involve communities concerned in the management of their ICH, Article 15. I made the point earlier that the institutions do not own the ICH. They're simply caretakers and collaborators. The communities are the ones who are the owners, and therefore they should be involved in the management. Article 15 sets that out. No? You want to be able to obtain and document the free, prior, and informed consent of communities concerned. You'll find this in Operational Directives 1, 2, and 7, and 101B. Again, and I think we've said it enough, so I won't lament the fact, but the community's free, prior, and informed consent is required. And one of there are several ways to do that. You can prepare a standard sheet that says, I, Mr. John Newton of so and so and so, I'm a practitioner of playing the banjo, and I hereby give consent to the Grenada National Trust to record and to document my knowledge, excuse me, about the playing of banjo, the types of music, excuse me, and to use it for educational purposes. Now, being able to state what it's used for is critical, because one of the things I would discourage strongly, excuse me, as an ethical consideration, and I don't expect that to be the case, but just in case I'll say it, you want to say it's for the purposes of safeguarding and for education, no? As a minimum standard, right? If persons come to you, Mr. Newton, for your knowledge, outside of for the purpose of safeguarding and educational purposes, you need to be aware of that, no? Because in many countries, take for example traditional medicine and traditional knowledge, persons come in, foreigners in particular, where countries do not have the capacity themselves. They go into these countries and they document how the indigenous people use particular plants and so on. They take it back with them, and then they turn it into publications, they turn it into research on particular plants and so on. And there are no benefits that accrue to the community from which the knowledge was acquired, no? Yeah. So this is the sort of thing to keep in mind. So there's no specific guidance on how to identify communities and how to involve them in safeguarding their ICH. However, the rule is identify them as much as possible, no? Where possible. Because we come from the communities too, right? And so we might have particular skills as being part of that. I'll give you an example. I was part of the focal point agency for doing this sort of thing. But once I left that work, I give my support to one of the cultural organizations to do the same thing, no? So the skills you can involve yourselves in various ways. So why community participation? People enact and transmit ICH and identify with it. They carry with them the knowledge and skills for enacting and transmitting the ICH, right? It is their heritage and they are its stewards. Watch this fourth point. Any safeguarding will fail without the community's participation and consent. I saw a very unfortunate situation recently where I give you the example of a popularization of folk songs. In one community, this particular gentleman, being of the same ethnicity too, the same cultural group, he heard this folk song and he took it and started playing it, got it recorded with different instrumentations, and he started playing it and it was heard on radio. But what apparently didn't happen, according to the community, was that he did not get their consent, no? And that man can't go back into that community. Right? So you want to avoid that sort of thing. You want to avoid, boy, Mr. Darrell, come, he better not show your face here. You want to avoid that sort of thing, no? The role of states and the rights of the communities. The convention is an agreement between states. It does not impose obligations on communities because the states don't ratify the communities. It's the state, the communities don't ratify the convention. It's the state that ratifies it on behalf of communities. But you can't put obligations on communities because it's the state ratifying it. So you get that, you see that interplay there. The convention and the operational directives request state parties to involve and assist communities with their consent in managing and safeguarding their ICH. This is where you have the legal policy structures, no? You've seen this before. In what ways can communities participate, identify and define, to inventory, to raise awareness, capacity build, safeguard, management, to prepare nominations, to assist with international assistance requests, to do periodic reporting. So in the same way that the trust might be involved or the foundation or the ministry can be involved in any of these aspects, the communities have the same skills and can be trained in the same skills to assist in this work, no? In collaboration with the focal points or the entities undertaking any aspect of it at any time. Community participation in inventorying their ICH. And here's a nice quotation from Dr. Fonseca in Brazil. What is really needed is for the community to participate in the process of inventory. If the inscription of an inventory takes place without dialogue with the community, I wonder whether there will actually be any involvement in safeguarding. You don't want the community to say, we just hear about that on TV the other day and nobody tell me nothing about that. Ooh, you really ask for trouble. You're asking for trouble if that sort of thing happens, no? Here's a case study documenting the Subanen indigenous knowledge in the Philippines. The elders themselves realized that their knowledge about local plants was not being passed down to younger generations and community members. So, young people were trained to document this knowledge within the community. They gained copyright protection. This is a new dimension to the whole thing now. Copyright protection, no? For what was documented. The materials were included in the school curriculum. And that was one way of enhancing the transmission from the elders to the younger generation. Community participation in awareness raising. The operational directives encourage states to ensure community participation in raising awareness about their own ICH and to obtain free plan-informed consent. Again, not to belabor this point, free, prior, and informed consent. So you can't get permission after the fact, no? And you have to inform them of what it is you're doing, and they cannot be coerced into it. This can help to ensure that awareness-raising activities do not misrepresent or disadvantage communities and the ICH. If you are able to master this, you'll be okay, no? Because communities will trust you, that you're trying to represent them well, especially if there are particular education outputs or public outputs to be created. Community participation in nominations and international assistance requests. Proof is required of community participation in the preparation of the files, in their identification of the ICH and the projects concerned. So when the trust reports on this particular project, they will describe the extent to which community was involved, no? And who were the stakeholders involved. Community consent for submission of nominations. So you can prepare a nomination, but without their consent, it can't go. So they have to give you consent for that too. Community commitment to safeguard the element, if appropriate, no? Here's a case study. Yes, Darrell.
Nigel, I understand the principle of community consent, but we're getting to, you see, the communities are not that organized that it just might be, you're just going to talk to 2, maybe 3 boat builders. So I guess that's the community. You're really getting individual consent, you know? Just, okay.
That's right, that's right. The situation will dictate, Darrell, no? Mm-hmm. Where the consent comes from. Sometimes you won't need, let's say you have a whole community, right? Sometimes not every member of the community will need to give you consent. If, as Margaret pointed out earlier, if there's a community leader or elder, someone who speaks on their behalf, and if they give that person the clearance to give you the consent, then you're good to go, no? Right? But there should be an open and transparent system involved. You can't say that Mr. Peter gave me consent, and then the others didn't know that he gave you consent. It can't work like that either, no? Right? You want it to be transparent and open. So here's a case study from Mexico. Yotimi let me see if I can get this. Chichimecas. Yotimi Chichimecas nomination process. So they were developing a nomination. So the community, there were community consultation meetings that were held and an opinion poll. The safeguarding proposals for the nomination came directly from the community. There was even a regional forum held, and a community declaration was drafted. This is something that they want to do and to support. And so this is an example of what you call representative management, no? Where they set up a body from among the communities to look after the safeguarding of the element itself, as well as to give consent to the nomination be forwarded to UNESCO, no? Here's the Cantu in Paella from France. I think it's you have groups like this in Portugal and other parts of Europe. It's a polyphonic singing. So the expert practitioners held meetings. They established a practitioner association. The practitioners themselves were involved in the inventorying, and there were media campaigns around it, no? So this is how you involve one particular set of community members. In this case, we're dealing with expert practitioners themselves. So it might be the same thing there in Grenada. If you have a particular element that you have expert practitioners, the string band, do you have string band there in Grenada? String band music?
Describe a string band.
Well, all strings.
Go ahead and say Carriacou. I ain't gonna be mad. Go ahead and say it. They don't want to say Carriacou. They know it's Carriacou got that good string music.
They do, huh? So when we say string band, you mean the majority of the instruments in the band are some string instrument, right? Banjo or harp type instruments and so on. I'm just, right?
Yeah.
But those would be expert practitioners, no?
Yeah.
And so they themselves would be involved in the inventorying process. No, it's just an example of how the practitioners themselves were involved in the inventory.
Nigel.
Yes, sir.
I'm not quite sure of that, but I'll raise the point anyway.
Mm-hmm.
How does that fit in with the government practice of having memorandum of understanding with foreign institutions?
With foreign institutions?
Or foreign visit, whatever happens, you come to Grenada to do something and you must have permission from the government through a memorandum of understanding. Is that the same thing or does it go down the same road?
It's in the same ballpark, but
okay.
The difference here is that if those entities have any interactions with the communities, it's still not the government giving permission to do that.
Okay.
As a rule, communities can make themselves available or not, no?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
At least in democratic societies, no?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or there might be other systems in place where there's a system within the community where the elder, the alcalde, or the mayor, whatever titles they possess, they might be the ones who can give you consent to speak with the community at large, no? Right? You can't go in there, you literally tie you up and chase you out. I've seen it, no? Right.
Right.
So here's an example from Kenya, nominating the Mijikenda traditions and practices associated with the Kaya people. So they held community consultations, they incorporated community ideas into their safeguarding plan, because with these nominations, you have to submit either a proposed safeguarding measures or proposed safeguarding plans. And the difference between the two is safeguarding measures are for elements being inscribed to the representative list. Safeguarding plans are for measures, are for elements being inscribed to the urgent safeguarding list. So one is a plan, and you're telling UNESCO that this is a plan you will undertake because this element is endangered. And so as a subsequent part of that nomination process, community development groups were formed, because their role then would be to assist with the implementation of the safeguarding plan itself. So ensuring community participation and consent. So you'll ask yourself, who is the community concerned? Who represents them and with what mandate? Margaret used the phrase opinion leaders. There might be other ways of referring to them or knowing who they are, no? In these communities. And it might be a tricky situation, it might not be, but the idea is to find out who represents whom and who speaks for whom. All right. How can they be informed and involved? So you would have to determine that. How do you inform them and involve them? Sometimes you go into and you do what they call snowballing. You just to do your groundwork. No, you go and you find out who are the drummers here, and you go and they take you to one set of, are there any drummers that you know of? And then you say, yes, you have some guys that perform down at St. Margaret's Road, right? That sort of thing. And so that helps you to know what process you will use to keep them informed and involved. How can safeguarding measures and other actions be developed with their involvement and consent? Who may and who should be involved in implementing and monitoring the safeguarding and other actions? So subsets of the communities might be involved directly with implementation, but also, and this is also overlooked a lot of times, the monitoring of the safeguarding and other actions. By having them involved in the monitoring, they'll be quick to, and if they have a good relationship with the state entities, the NGOs, the ministries, and so on, they'll be the person showing up at the office and you said, Miss Rena, we have a problem with Shakespeare's mask, you know. Something happened where one of the major practitioners got sick and she's not doing so well. And so do you know, is there anything that we can do to ensure her recovery and to somehow get her to pass on the knowledge to somebody? That sort of thing. That's sort of lively everyday discussion in keeping the elements alive.
Hi, Jill.
Yes, sir.
Will we be involved? I mean, will you encourage involvement in community building? And I'm asking that from the standpoint of a question that was posed. The young lady wanted to know, are we aiming to bring back ICH elements that have been discontinued? Now, if we are doing that, then we may have to, you know, they may have some stories about it, but we may have to help the community in that work. Right. Is that encouraged?
Well, it's certainly a noble thing. If you can revive an element, there's an opportunity to do it, and the communities are willing to do the work, I don't see why not, no? And the resources are there and all that. It's certainly something to determine based on your best judgment of the situation on the ground and whether or not to pursue it. But it's available, it depends on the resources, human and financial too sometimes, no? Because what you'll find after you do your inventory, right? You'll get a better understanding of the cultural landscape. And you will have these categories. These elements are viable, they're doing well. And they'll continue to do well with this side of support. You have these elements that are endangered. And then you'll have to give them, these require a more meticulous approach in working with the communities to safeguard them. And then you'll have a third category of elements that are no longer here. So you will have to ask yourself, how do I allocate my resources, one, human and otherwise, among the three different categories of those elements that are viable and doing well, those elements that are in danger, that need help, and those that are already gone but can be revived, no? So that's a very localized. So you understand what I'm saying, right, Ezra? You'll have to decide, no, on the ground. Right. I can give you an example of, let me see, reviving elements that are no longer there. No, I don't have any experience with it, but I can tell you of one where the element was in danger, that there was one practitioner left, one family of practitioners, and the grandmother was the matriarch of the practice. And so we attempted to we set up a whole program for 4 years, where we connected the family with the school. The children attended the school. The grandmother who was raising the children went in and would teach the kids about this particular element called the carnival in a particular village. Not the carnival like what you have, but carnival in a village. And with the hope that she would live long enough that one of her children would take up the leadership of it, or someone in the village would become interested in it. Eventually she passed and the practice died with her, in spite of our best efforts, no? Right? So that's trying to deal with an endangered element, but there's no guarantee, no, that it will survive. there were other pressures on it too, because the community members, I think someone raised it earlier and we said, oh, they do devil worshipping. Look at the mask the children have to wear and all this sort of thing. And so sometimes there are other hidden pressures. Churches sometimes bring pressure on community ICH, no? You tell them that you're going to hell because of that. You know.
Okay.
Yeah, but you get the picture, no? But the communities themselves have ways of navigating these things, or not, no? Because I know, I guess in Belize, not that I'm against churches, I'm a Catholic, and one village of 150 persons having 7 churches.
Ooh.
You get the picture, no?
Yeah.
And so identifying the communities concerned, people who identify with one or more ICH elements. Some communities, so that's one way to do it. People identify with one or more ICH elements. You have people like that, they're just culturalists all over. Everywhere there's culture, you see them, no? They're just fountains of knowledge and engagement. Or the opinion leaders, if you want to. Some communities are already recognized. I want to tell a story about that one. Do you have people in your communities where if you want to learn something, you get home and mom, the teacher wants us to write a paragraph about what? About what? Tradition, about parang. And you must say, oh, go right down the street, you'll see Mr. Bradford. And that evening, everybody is at Mr. Bradford's house, right? And next week, the teacher gives another assignment. And whose house you think they go to? Mr. Bradford. Same Mr. Everything that deals with culture, they send it to Mr. Bradford's house because somehow he knows about these things and is actively engaged with it, no? Margaret, you had something to add?
I apologize.
Okay, Tahira? There's something to add there? No?
Typing, hit the button.
All right. Some communities are already recognized within the state. Local, ethno-linguistic, religious communities, for argument's sake. Raising the point of religion earlier, religions themselves, again, can't be inscribed, but rituals, practices associated with religion might be, right? People may belong to several communities. They may leave or join communities, no? People concerned should agree with the identification as a community, right? So whatever you are identifying elements, for argument's sake, you want a community consensus on it, no? Community complexities, and you know they are. It is most often assumed that a community is harmonious, homogeneous, inclusive, and willing to participate. Who is who within the community? Who decides who should or should not participate? Who participates and why? These are questions to be asked. Who is left out and why? What needs to be done to ensure equal opportunities are created and that there is support for all to participate, right? One of the things, again, these are more of the nuances. Ask yourself when you're involved in this work, if the work involves marginalizing people, is it something you really want to engage, no? You understand what I mean? If it involves marginalizing folks, then you have to think about that. Gender and community involvement. Why is gender-based approach essential when considering community involvement and participation within the framework of the convention? Because these are international conventions, they abide by international rules for gender roles and so on. Yesterday, for argument's sake, was International Women's Day. We know the plight of women globally. We also know that women are also in most cases the persons responsible for transmitting cultural knowledge. Why? Because they spend time with the children more so than the men, no? Right? Everyone runs to mother, right? Goes home to mother, mother's cooking, mother's stories, mother's care, right? It contextualizes the practices and activities of gender-defined groups by analyzing the social relationships that are established and the power dynamics of the community concerned, right? Some indigenous communities in particular, as I told you, they have a system where the men perform certain roles and the women perform certain roles. You can't speak to the wife without the husband present. And the wife can't speak to anybody at all without the husband's permission, right? So that gives you the ability to analyze those cultural dynamics, no? That's like an example of an indigenous community, right? It ensures that women and marginalized gender groups are equal spokespersons vested with the authority to reshape communities they desire to be a part of and those they want to create, all right? Identifying representatives, there's a need for representatives. Are there any existing representatives? Who has the mandate and legitimacy of representation to be representatives? Are there different views within the communities? The fourth point is critical. You might be inventorying a thing. I can remember doing a documentation and inventorying exercise, and we stopped at a couple of homes just to get the views of persons on the periphery, and the same thing came up. Those people, I remember one household saying, you know, mister, those people, I'm sorry for them, you know. God will punish them bad. They're going to hell. Because what they're doing is, that is not God, what God wants, and so on, right? So those are some of the different views that will appear within communities, and you want to be aware of what those are as well, right? Newton, I see the laugh.
No, nothing in particular. In particular. I was brought up in a Christian household.
Right. Well, me too. You know, but I'm just showing you. I'm just explaining some of the realities out there, no? And you want to be aware of what those views are. So methods and purposes for community participation, there are many. You can host workshops, meetings, consultations, conduct polls through the media, capacity building. You know, you can add social media to that, right? Awareness raising. For identification of elements, you want to engage them again, awareness raising, safeguarding, developing nominations. We've been through that before. What does free, prior, and informed consent entail? Free, no undue pressure. Prior, the information required is provided to them ahead, in advance of engaging them and taking their information, right? And informed, all the relevant information for making a balanced judgment was provided. Don't hide any information. This is what we're doing with it. It's Brenda, we're not using this to make money. We simply want to create educational materials that we can share with the kids in school. And that is the extent of it. If there are any additional uses that you perceive or you plan, you need to, later on, by the way, sometimes that happens, no? There's some economic opportunities that might come up for communities. Don't use the same free, prior, and informed consent that they gave you. Engage them again to get their permission to have their element involved in whatever project, especially if it involves economic gain, no? So you want to do that again. You don't use the prior one because in the first instance, there was no financial commit or reward or benefit involved. But if later on, there is some project that involves the element being used as livelihood, you engage that process again. Protecting the rights of communities. The rights of communities, groups, and individuals are duly protected when awareness raising about the heritage or engaging in commercial activities. Key thing here, your communities should be so educated about this concept that nobody can go in there to ask permission without them saying to them, do you have any document for me to sign, or they not being knowing that they can give consent. You know what I mean? That's how your community should get to that point in this project, right? Ensuring that communities benefit. Practicing ICH brings benefits to communities. So can safeguarding activities. And even there might even be financial benefits there that we talked about, but you re-engage that process. Communities' capacities to manage the ICH should be enhanced. Train your communities, train the youth to do documentation and research. Give them the cameras. Show them how to use their phones for that purpose. Create TikTok ICH videos, you know? Any of you guys on TikTok, Ezra?
No.
No? Margaret, you're on TikTok, I can tell. No, I have a...
I'm not. I'm really not. I can't handle all that stuff. I haven't
But-
even figured out what Pinterest is for, so no, I can't handle that.
I'm raising it deliberately because what I'm suggesting is that these are modern technologies available that youth can deploy for the safeguarding and awareness raising of community ICH, right? So those are technologies that can be available, right? Can be used. Communities should benefit from awareness raising activities. Communities should be the primary beneficiaries of any commercial activity, right? They should be the primary beneficiaries. So if you develop a project, again, we talked about this on day one, and their commercial benefits to be derived, it can't be that the coordinator of some entity gets 90% and the community gets 10%, no? You really want to be wary of that sort of thing, all right? So that's just involving the communities, no? So we have one more segment to go.
Right.
And let's take another 5-minute break unless there are questions.
Okay, but I want us to discuss that rescheduling a little bit because we're running behind. Now, everybody, we really asked Nigel if he could compress this, what was supposed to be a six-hour workshop into 4 hours for everybody's convenience and speed. And it's difficult because there's some subjects and we are relying on him to determine which ones those are. Really, you can't rush through and you have to let people hash it out. So now today we're running about an hour behind. And what we could do is extend today at short notice. I don't know how it's going to affect everybody, and arrange with the hotel for lunch so that we don't have any fainting spells. Or we could agree in advance that tomorrow will be the long day. We don't want to make it Friday because we want to wrap up without too much exhaustion. But maybe we could make tomorrow the long day, which might be better for us. You could plan to be here for 1 extra hour, and also the hotel, short notice, I don't know, 10, 15 lunches, I don't know. So Nigel, what do you think?
Well, an hour would get us to where we want for today, because about the topic on sustainable development, we moved that into that final segment on Friday, where we look at the SDGs and so on, see where culture appears in national development. But an hour would get us where we want to be. We'd be able to cover the last topic for the day, and then just to go over an assignment for tomorrow.
Right.
Probably less. We could even do it in 45 minutes or so after the break. No?
So in that case, we're looking at the end of the session today, people can stay back and have lunch here instead of, okay? Everybody in agreement with that? I'm sorry for those of you in Zoom land, as Ezra requested. We can send you a picture of the lunch. That's what Facebook does, is mainly used for anyway.
Cold.
But so can we agree that then that we stay the extra hour today, and so that we don't We don't overload tomorrow with too much. Yeah. So we stay the extra hour today. Nigel?
Yeah, it'll probably be a little bit less once we
Yeah,
come back
please.
in 10 minutes or so, or take
Yeah.
a stretch and then because I've actually
Okay. Yeah. So this has to be a very crisp 10-minute break because we can't erode too much time. Okay.
I'll hang in as long as I can. If I can't, then I'll watch the rest online when I get back.
Yeah.
But you know, everything here starts shutting down at 2 o'clock. So morning
At
is
2.
for me. That's it. That's the whole day.
Really? At 2?
Yeah, the banks are closing at 2. So that's so like if we